Xi Jinping, the current leader in China, speaks of 100 years of humiliation, roughly 1850 to 1950, 100 years during which China felt itself to be, then and now, humiliated, as Western countries, particularly, took over bits and pieces of China, fighting wars, taking over whole cities, and plunging the society into levels of poverty much greater than what they had seen before. On the other hand, there never was a full colonialism. China kept its independence, unlike India or Indonesia or most of Africa and so on. So you have a mixture of humiliation and independence. There were never settler colonists. No Europeans settled in to large parts of China. Yeah, they had places in cities along the coast, but they never took over the country the way, for example, they did in South Africa or New Zealand or Australia or the United States or Canada, and I could go on. More modern, once the 20th century came, two terribly interesting things happened almost at the same time. A final war defeating the Chinese, known as the Boxer Rebellion, saw the Europeans come together to deal a pretty devastating blow and to show that they were the dominant power, even if they didn't settle into a colonial relationship. And not so surprisingly, very few years after the Soviet Revolution in Russia, in 1917, a few years after that, Chinese do a revolution too. Chinese communists, inspired in part by the Russian Revolution, begin the Long March, begin the movement led by Mao that would eventually, in 1949, lead to the victory of the Communist Party and its army over the friendly to the West army of Chiang Kai-shek, the little bit of capitalism that had been implanted in China after the Boxer Revolution by the Western powers, who apparently hoped over the long run to develop a more complacent, subordinated capitalism in China. Their plans were defeated. A civil war brought the communists to victory in 1949. They were in alliance with the Soviet Union from 1949 to around 1960. Then the Soviet Union and China split with bitter, difficult, even occasionally military conflict between them. The Chinese then undertook a development of their own, different from the Soviets in Russia. Yes, socialism has many forms, and for the last 60 years, China has gone its own way to produce its own distinctive version of socialism or communism, depending on which word you think fits better. And it's in these last 60 years, and particularly in the last 40 or so, that the achievements with which I began today's program were made. It became a powerful country. It became a socialism with Chinese characteristics.